Hello, thank you. Yeah, we're going to talk about SCCM. We were actually about to ask that question, so he got a bit ahead of us. So we have a QR code up here with the slide deck, so if anyone wants to download that, follow along, it's hosted on the GitHub repository that we're going to talk about, so feel free to do that. If you don't grab it this time, it's also at the end, so. All right. So my name's Duane Michael. I'm a managing consultant at SpectreOps on the adversary simulation team. I have contributed, wrote some code for Sharp SCCM. My handle is subatomic on all the different things. At SpectreOps, I do pen tests, red teams, also teach some of our courses like red team operations.
I'm Chris Thompson. I'm a principal consultant at SpectreOps on the adversary simulation team. I wrote Sharp SCCM about 3 years ago when we first started this research. And also wanted to introduce our coworker, Garrett Foster, who's a co-author of the Misconfiguration Manager project with us. Couldn't be here today. If you've heard of SCCM Hunter, any of the red teamers in the room, that was Garrett's tool. So we were going to ask a couple questions. Wanted to see who in the room's a defender? Okay, about a third. Maybe some people didn't raise their hands. How about attackers? Okay. Probably about 50-50. And both. Who's both? There we go. All right, I think that's everybody. Cool. So who's heard of SCCM? Pretty much everybody. Okay, cool. Seemed like maybe a quarter of folks were using it, or at least knew that they were using it. Who's not sure if they have SCCM at their organization? All right, cool. We'll help you out. For those who do use SCCM, who has a remote site database or SMS provider, or knows if they do? Okay, one. This talk is definitely for you. Who's got a network access account? Anybody? Client push installation? Red teamers in the house. Who has compromised an Active Directory domain or forest through SCCM? All right, 5, 6 hands, cool. We're gonna teach a couple more ways to do that.
All right, so we'll start off with going over the agenda. We're gonna cover a lot in this talk. It's probably best to approach this talk as kind of a sampling of what is possible and what's out there, because there's just too much. We could talk about this for probably days and still not cover all of the techniques. So we're gonna start off with an introduction to what SCCM is, what it can be used for, how we can abuse it as attackers, why it might be interesting for us, and why it might be interesting to pay attention to these things as a defender or an admin. So we'll expose you to some of the most common SCCM attack paths. We'll talk about things like some of the war stories or some of the stories from the field that we've seen on real-world engagements in real enterprises. We'll do a couple demos. So we'll demo what it looks like to dump network access accounts. We'll do a hierarchy takeover demo, and then we'll also demo an audit script that we have that you can use to audit these misconfigurations in your environment. And then finally, we'll introduce the actual Misconfiguration Manager project, which some of you may have or may have not yet seen. What this presentation does not cover is we don't have walkthroughs for everything. We'll show you all the techniques that we've documented and written about, but like I said, we just can't cover everything here. We're not going to cover specific defensive walkthroughs in this talk, but we do have those available online. And like I said, this is a sampling, so we're not going to give a comprehensive treatment of everything. So we do have much more detail in the repo that we'll talk about. All right, so seems like most people here are at least familiar with what SCCM is, but for those that are not, we'll just kind of set the baseline and talk about what it is. So SCCM, currently known as Microsoft Configuration Manager, it's an endpoint management platform. It's used to manage all of the things in your Windows enterprise. So you can do things like deploy applications, manage software updates, install operating systems, and manage things like compliance settings as well. So pretty much anything that you need to do on the endpoint, you can do through SCCM. again, we're calling it SCCM, but it's currently called it's currently called Microsoft Configuration Manager. So the old acronym or the old name was System Center Configuration Manager, so they're interchangeable.
The subreddit is still named SCCM, so we'll change it when they do.
Yeah, it's official until then. All right, so as an attacker, why should you care about SCCM? So I would say the vast majority, this is not a scientific number, but I'll say 99% of Active Directory environments are using SCCM. So if you're a pen tester or a red teamer and you're in those environments, you're probably already operating around SCCM in some way. So you'll probably encounter it. SCCM can be used, so it's not tied to Active Directory directly, so you can use a single SCCM instance to manage multiple sites or multiple forests. So you can kind of ignore that entire AD hierarchy that you're used to in SCCM. So this could be useful if you're operating in an environment where maybe you have to move from one forest to another. Maybe there are no trust between them, but they're using the same SCCM site. You can hop between those forests because they might have certain things configured, which we'll talk about. And it's commonly misconfigured. So that's what we're here to talk about. There's a lot of insecure defaults, and it's old. It's 30 years old. So over the years, there has been a lot of advice from the community, from admins that have written about how to do things that are usually just the easiest way to do something rather than the most secure. So as a defender or an admin, why should you care? Well, just building onto what I just said, all of those are reasons that you should care, of course. But again, you're probably using SCCM if you're working in an enterprise that has Active Directory. And then these misconfigurations that we're going to talk about can introduce some pretty serious vulnerabilities that, like I said, they can lead to domain compromise, forest compromise, remote forest compromise. So it's definitely a good idea to start looking at this stuff. All right, so credit to Karsten for this diagram. So SCCM has kind of hasn't been super popular in the offensive world, but over the years there have been a couple nuggets here and there. So SCCM is 30 years old, like I said. First released back in 1994. There have been a lot of releases and name changes over the next couple decades. And then around up here in 2012, Dave Kennedy and one of his colleagues did a talk at DEF CON just talking about using SCCM to compromise the rest of an environment. So basically, if you could compromise SCCM, you can probably compromise other stuff. And that was really the first indication that people were looking at it offensively. And then over the next couple years, you can see there were a couple other blog posts. Some of these were more defensive focused, using SCCM for incident response, things like that. And then one of our colleagues, Matt Nelson, and some of our other colleagues at SpectreOps started looking into it back around 2015, 2016. And after that, it kind of went dormant. And back in 2021, Chris and I were on a red team operation, and we had the use case of trying to find where certain privileged users were logged on, and we're like, that should be possible with SCCM. And that kind of sparked Sharp SCCM and everything that we're going to talk about today. And so then in 22 and 23 and 24, there's been a lot of blog posts from both our colleagues at SpectreOps, but also in the community as well. It's getting a lot of traction out there in the offensive community, which is really awesome to see.
All right, so before we dive into the attacks that are possible due to the misconfigurations in SCCM, want to just kind of get everybody familiar with some of the terminology. It can be somewhat confusing. A lot of things are named very similarly. So a hierarchy in SCCM is the instance. It's the full installation. It's the security boundary, kind of like a forest in Active Directory is supposed to be the security boundary. A site is an environment that provides services to a scope of client devices, and clients and devices are two words for the same thing. It's systems that are joined to Configuration Manager to receive updates, policies, download software packages, things like that. And in our offensive use case, it's kind of like having a C2 agent on every machine. The primary site, there can be multiple environment, is a site that the clients are joined to. That is where they receive policy from, that's where they download software from. And the primary sites are administered using software called the Configuration Manager console. If you're an admin, that's the software that you use. That's pretty much the one-stop shop. Primary site server is kind of like the controlling system for every primary site. It has a site server. All of the messages pass through this system between the different roles that servers have in SCCM. And it's also just referred to as the site server. So the site server is the controller, and the site systems are the other servers that host roles in SCCM. So kind of confusing, but if we say the site server, we're referring to a primary site server. And the site database server is where the database is hosted, so that's where all of the client configuration data is housed. Policies, where software is located on other machines, things like that, and also where administrative roles and assignments are stored. So that's where things like administrative users are defined. So there can be multiple tiers in a hierarchy, the highest tier being a central administration site. This is optional. You don't have to use one of these unless you have more than 150,000 devices on the network. Microsoft recommends just using a primary site if you have less devices than this. But you can have a central administration site and then multiple primary sites. A lot of organizations will do this to have client devices update their software, for different time zones so that it's when people are offline for the day, things like that. So we see it pretty frequently. And each primary site and the central administration site have their own site database. Secondary sites, sometimes we see them, they contain a partial copy of the database, and they're usually at a remote office location or somewhere that has terrible bandwidth, so that the primary site server can push software out there once, and then client devices in that location can pull that software down over a more reliable connection. This is what that type of hierarchy might look like with the central administration site at the top, 2 primary sites. Our client devices are going to be joined to those primary sites, but the client devices may or may not receive policy and software from a secondary site. The takeaway here is just these environments can be pretty complex to manage, and you might see a lot of these elements if you're a consultant who is looking at these environments at different organizations. So a couple site system roles that we're going to talk about. So these are the other servers. So we've got the primary site server. That's the main controller for SCCM. And these roles can be installed on that machine, or they can be installed on a remote machine. So the SMS provider is basically an interface for that Configuration Manager console software. So the admin logs into Config Manager console. Config Manager console software contacts an SMS provider over WMI or HTTPS. And then the SMS provider is what interacts with the site database directly. A management point is the client device's first point of contact. Is this working? There we go. First point of contact. So clients are going to report back to a management point periodically. They're going to send a heartbeat. They're going to send their inventory. They're going to say, hey, this. Okay, there we go. Thank you. So yeah, they're going to retrieve policy from a management point, and then a distribution point is where the software is actually housed for them to download and install from. So they'll contact a management point, say, hey, checking in. Management point will say, I have this task for you. Download the software from the distribution point and install it at this time. This is a diagram of the communication protocols that exist between these systems. So we have our clients here. They report up to a management point, say, hey, can I have some policy? If you have anything new for me, that is going to be controlled by the primary site server. and then they may download some software from the distribution point, and admins are going to interact with an SMS provider that may or may not be located on the primary site server. Not confusing at all.
Okay, so as you can tell, there's a lot of things, a lot of moving parts, and SCCM also has a lot of accounts, which makes things even more confusing for admins. So in these next couple slides, I'm going to talk about some different types of accounts that are used commonly and often misconfigured that can lead to like a domain privilege escalation. So the first one is client push installation. So client push installation is how that site server is actually installing the client on a new computer or a new device in the SCCM site. The other is the network access account. So this is the most commonly abused one that we see. And I'll get into more detail in the coming slides on these, so don't worry too much. And then here I say task sequence. That's just because a task sequence is basically a sequence of execution steps that can be run on clients. And so depending on how they're configured, there can be various different accounts within task sequences. So domain join accounts are one that we see quite a bit. Run as accounts, which are, as the name implies, used to run as a different account. Collection variables and things like that can also store secrets. Oh. Okay, so first we'll talk about client push installation. So like I mentioned, this is how the SCCM server is actually installing the client software on a computer to enroll it as a client. So in order to do this, the server will have to copy some installation files over to the device on the admin share, and then it will execute ccmsetup.exe. And then it will use a configured client push installation account to execute that. And so as you can imagine, that client push installation account has to be a local admin on the client. And since we're doing this on every client or any new computer that joins the site, this account is going to be local admin on every device. So you see where this is going. Okay, so as an admin, if you're in a large enterprise and there's a lot of computers and devices joining your network, you probably don't want to manually handle that process of joining computers or discovering that a new computer needs to become a client. So SCCM also has this feature called automatic site-wide client push installation. And so what happens here is the site server will discover these computers and automatically reach out to try to install this client software. And so that's interesting. That's a privileged account authenticating to a potential SCCM client. So we can abuse this by spoofing a new SCCM device. So if we can spoof a device record, which is the message that is sent to the site server to say, hey, I'm a new device, I want to become a client. If we spoof that, then we can cause that site server to connect back to us, and we now have that incoming authentication. And so this will be NCLM authentication. So then we could then relay that to something else and authenticate as that site server or as that client push installation account, which again is local admin on every client in the environment.
Yep. One thing to add there, you could also potentially crack the password, and multiple client push installation accounts may be configured by the administrator, and the site server will try each one until they all fail, and then it will try its domain computer account. And the client push installation is just one method of installation. There are much more secure methods of installation, like group policy-based or software update-based. But because it is the easiest to set up, we do see this fairly frequently.
All right, the next account is the network access account. So we asked this earlier. Who is using a network access account in an environment now? Okay, there were hands earlier. Who has abused a network access account in an environment? Okay, now there are some hands. All right, so the network access account is kind of a flawed design. It's a domain account that is configured on the SCCM server, and its sole purpose is for when an SCCM client is not domain joined. Again, remember, it's not tied to Active Directory. So if a client is not domain joined, it can use this network access account to reach back and authenticate to a distribution point to retrieve software updates. That's basically its whole purpose. So it's actually deprecated. Microsoft does not recommend using it except for a few specific use cases, which are documented in our project. So if you don't fall into one of those very niche use cases, we recommend not using a network access account. It requires very minimal privileges, though, if you are using one. All you need to be able to do is read that network share on the distribution point. And so the network access account is, or I should say overprivileged network access accounts is the most common misconfiguration that we see. Sometimes this is just an easy button to domain admin because of how commonly it is overprivileged and misconfigured. So when you're setting up an SCCM site and you're setting up all these accounts, it's really easy to just enter the same like domain admin or SCCM full administrator account for all of these things. And we see that quite often. And so how do we get this network access account in the first place? Well, this is it's sent out as a secret in a computer policy that gets sent out to all clients in the SCCM site. And so if we can do a local privesc on a client, we can retrieve this policy and decrypt the secrets, the network access account credentials. Or if we can spoof a computer account or add a computer account to the domain, we can request the policy and deobfuscate these secrets. And yes, I said deobfuscate, not decrypt. So when these get sent to the client, they're encrypted via DPAPI. And so they're encrypted with the system DPAPI key. So if you can do a local privesc, you can simply grab that key and decrypt it, and you have creds. If they're overprivileged, maybe you're easy button domain admin. Before they get received by the client, they are obfuscated in the actual policy request, and we can make that request and then just deobfuscate it, which we have a demo for and we'll talk about a little bit later. That technique was written about by our colleague Evan McBroom, simultaneously Adam Chester, both independently, but really cool research that makes it pretty easy if you have the ability to add a domain computer account, which is a default. All right, so like I mentioned, due to so many different accounts being in SCCM, it's pretty common to just see the same account used for everything, like a single SCCM account that is just God mode across the board. So we've seen domain admins configured as network access accounts, the SCCM admin, the client push installation also used as the network access account. We've seen accounts where it's not admin on all workstations, but it's admin on all SCCM servers. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later in the stories from the field. But like I said, we find this all the time. Almost every pen test or red team that we've done since we started looking into this, we find this. So it's out there. I recommend fixing it if you are working in an environment like this, but if you're a pen tester or a red team, definitely recommend fixing it for your clients. And then finally, this last bullet, the creds may persist beyond account rotation. So due to the way that the WMI or the SIM repository on Windows works, some of the objects in that database don't actually get removed when they should. So to query the NAA, we can just do a WMI query. Okay, so if that is no longer, if that account gets removed from the configuration because that those credentials were stored in the WMI database, they may persist even though it is no longer configured. And so that is something else that we've seen, where maybe a DA account was used as an NAA, and then they fixed that, but then the DA account still persists in this database. So then, even though they fixed the SCCM configuration, that DA account is still on every SCCM client in the environment. Okay, so I'm going to show a demo, super short. It's just going to show both of the techniques that I talked about, dumping it locally using WMI, and then making the request with the spoof computer and getting that deobfuscating the secrets in the policy. So let's see if I can do this. Okay, so first you can see we're going to use sharp SCCM with the local secrets -m for method WMI command. So you could also change that last bit to disk, and it will do that. It'll look for those legacy creds that I was just talking about, the ones that are persisting after rotation. All right, here we go. All right, so that was it, super short. So if you've used Sharp DP API before, this may look familiar. Full credit to Will Schroeder for the Sharp DP API project. I totally stole all this code for that. But you can see we're just grabbing the DP API system LSA secret, using that to decrypt the system master keys, and then finally we do a WMI query language, or WQL query, to grab the blobs and then decrypt the blobs here. So you can see that we have clear text credentials. It would also look for other credentials as well, because they are also stored via WMI. Just in this example, we only have the NAA configured. And then in this next one, we'll use, getting ahead of myself. Okay, now we'll use the get secrets command, and you can see we're specifying a computer account with its password. So for this, we are spoofing a new device, saying, hey, I'm a new computer, and I want to request this computer policy. And again, in this case, we deobfuscate these secrets, and this was before they get stored on the client, before they're DP API protected. So you can do this without being an admin on the client. You can also, I guess you don't even have to do this from a client. You just have to have the ability to add a domain computer account or control a domain computer account. There we go.
All right. The next type of attack that we're going to talk about is taking over the hierarchy. So as attackers, this is pretty obvious. We want the ability to run commands on any system in the environment. We may have, privileges within Active Directory, but our objective is to compromise some specific development group to access proprietary code or something like that. So we need to execute commands on this person's workstation in order to accomplish that objective, for example. So SCCM supports a lot of different methods to do this. You can run PowerShell, you can run an application, you can deploy a package. There's a ton of different ways to execute code on machines. There's also a feature called CM Pivot that basically lets you read any information on the device. Registry keys, file contents, event logs, all kinds of info without ever touching the system. It all happens through SCCM, and it flies under the radar very well. So Tom DeGrief and Kim Appelfens kind of talked about this in 2019 in their Defending the Castle talk. They were like, hey, IT admins, at some point, people are going to catch on that there's some pretty bad design flaws, or I guess design considerations that just over time attacks evolved that made them security weaknesses. So how do attackers actually take over a hierarchy? you want to get the full administrator role in any site. There is no security boundary between sites in the same hierarchy, and that's because the database contents are replicated between every site. So if you have a central administration site in the environment, and you add an administrator to primary site 1, that change will replicate to the central administration site, and then to primary site 2, 3, all of them. You'll be admin everywhere. Very quick NTLM relay primer. The subject is huge, but basically it's a person in the middle attack. So if you are on an attacker-controlled machine and you can get another system's domain computer account to authenticate to you, or really any domain account to authenticate to you over NTLM, you can relay that to another system and access that system with the incoming account's privileges. So you can do this to launch an agent with those privileges. You can add a user account, make any change you want after having done this. And there's a few bugs. There won't fix issues that you can use to do this. One of them is printer bug by Lee Chagala Christensen, our colleague, and then the other really popular one is Petit Patam by Lionel Giles. And these make it extremely easy to just say, hey, remote computer, I'm authenticating to you with any domain user account, please connect to me. And then you can challenge that system with authentication, and it will automatically authenticate to you with its domain computer account. And the reason that is important is because the primary site server's domain computer account requires local admin on every other site system role in the hierarchy, and is a DBA on the site database. So if we can coerce authentication from this account, and basically if we could reach the system over SMB, we probably can because of those won't fix issues. And then we can relay it to any of those other system roles that are hosted remotely from that system to gain control of SCCM. And there's a ton of different ways to do this. So a few examples. We can coerce NTLM from the primary site server over SMB and relay that to the MS SQL service on a remote site database. Grant ourselves a full administrator role with just by executing SQL statements. We can do the same thing, coerce over SMB from the primary site server, relay to the site database server over SMB. That's a local admin, so we'll be able to execute code. We could start a service, whatever we want. Once we have command line access to that system, we can use something like SQL command native tools in order to add ourselves to that role. And the list goes on and on. SMS providers also provide the ability to add administrative users, but there are tons of different combinations of this attack. So want to quickly walk through one of them. We just call it takeover 1. It was getting difficult to refer to all of these. I think we found 23 different combinations of hierarchy takeover attacks. So in this example, we have our attacker host in the middle. We have our primary site server on the left, and we have our site database on the right. The first step, we're going to start our relay server on our attacker host, and then we're going to use something like Petit Patam or Spool Sample that abuses the printer bug to coerce NTLM authentication from the site server. The site server is going to connect to the SMB service on our relay server on the attacker host, and we're going to connect to the MS SQL service on the site database. The site database is going to send us an NTLM challenge. We're going to forward that challenge to the site server, and the site server is going to use that challenge and create a challenge response for its domain computer account, send it to us. We're going to forward that challenge response to the SQL database, and then we're going to execute SQL statements and grant ourselves the full administrator role. This is 2 commands. And I'm going to show you a quick demo, maybe. All right, so this is the configuration manager console, just demonstrating here that the only 2 users with full administrator privileges are the lab admin. So right now we're going to use Garrett's SCCM Hunter project to generate the SQL statements. First we're going to check to see if we have admin privileges, and then we're going to generate those SQL statements. So right now we're listing members of the SMS admins group who have that full administrator role, and we can see that we have access denied as the low priv user. Now we're going to create the SQL statement in order to add the low priv user. It's really ugly, but basically what this is doing, it's creating a record in the role-based access, the RBAC admins table, and then it's adding 3 permissions that together equal full administrator. We are starting our relay server. We're going to forward incoming SMB NTLM authentication to the MS SQL service, and we're going to execute that big nasty statement. So we've started our relay server. Now we're going to use Petit Patam to coerce NTLM authentication from the primary site server's domain computer account. And if we come back over to our relay server, we see that the NTLM authentication was received. Authentication was forwarded to the site database and succeeded. And then we changed our database to the primary site database and added ourselves. And if we refresh, we can see that low priv is now a full administrator. Real quick before we dive into some kind of like stories from the field, in order to prevent this attack, you can implement NTLM relay protections on the different site system roles. So the SQL database supports extended protection for authentication. SMB signing requirements can be enforced on the endpoints where you could relay SMB2 to take over. And there's a few others that are all in the Misconfiguration Manager repo that we'll intro towards the end of this talk.
All right, so now for a couple slides, we're going to just tell some real-world stories, things that we have seen and abused in real enterprises. And the first, again, we're back to the overprivileged network access accounts. So each of these is a different occurrence, something different that we've seen. We also reached out to the community and had some people share stories about things that they have seen. So again, it's everywhere. So the first one that we'll talk about is local admin on every client. So one of our colleague Garrett, he was on an assessment, and I think he was kind of stuck somewhere and was doing SharePoint triage. You know, everyone loves doing that. And for some reason, that customer had SCCM Pixie boot media stored on SharePoint, and we were able to, or Garrett was able to crack that open and grab the network access account secrets, which happened to be local admin on every SCCM client in the environment. And then, again, I already mentioned that we see the NAA configured with the client push installation account, which is always local admin on every client. We've seen domain admin accounts. We've seen where it's not necessarily local admin on SCCM clients, but SCCM servers. So that's nice. And then, again, previous privileged NAAs recovered from the SIM repository. That's those ones that were configured before the accounts were rotated. And then this one I thought was pretty interesting, shared by Rustla. I'm sorry if I've been butchering the handle on Twitter. They found 2 different, so you can have multiple NAAs configured, and they found that 2 domain admin accounts for different domains were configured. So each domain had domain admin creds for the other domain. And I'm saying domain, but I actually think they were separate forests. So totally separate SCCM environments, totally separate AD environments. So again, lots of crazy stuff out there. Now this one is something that we see quite a bit, especially with our Bloodhound Enterprise customers. It kind of just lingers in the domain, and we're just now finding them, and it can be pretty bad. So SCCM can have an account configured called a domain join account, And as the name implies, this is used to join new computers to the domain. So if you configured Pixie Boot and you install, do like an operating system deployment, and you want to join that new computer to the domain, you would use something like a domain join account. And so when a computer is joined to the domain, the account that did the joining has ownership of that computer. And so fast forward 10 years or something, and that computer is somehow a domain controller, or maybe a new server was joined and using SCCM and was promoted to domain controller, you might find that the domain join account has ownership of domain controllers or other privileged assets in the environment. So depending on how the task sequence is configured, this could be present on the clients. Here, this is actually not completely accurate. It says present on all clients. But this could be present on SCCM clients. So the secrets might exist. So it's definitely worth looking at. If you run those sharp SCCM commands that I demoed with the get secrets or local secrets commands, you might find these. And it's definitely worth looking at. If you do find a domain join account, look at what it has ownership of. And then if you are on the blue side, definitely figure out what your domain join account is and use Bloodhound or something to look at what it's doing. Look at what it has ownership of, because, like I mentioned, we found several instances where this account has ownership of the entire domain, hundreds of thousands of computers, so it can be really bad. Okay, so SCCM clients and domain controllers, you might think that they are different things, and they're not necessarily different. So it's a non-default setting, but when you set up your SCCM site, you can configure it to enroll domain controllers as clients. And this is problematic, as you can imagine, because if we control SCCM, we have code execution over every client in the environment. If this is configured, then we can control domain controllers by compromising SCCM. When we first started looking into SCCM, or at least I thought that I was like, there's no way that people actually do that. And turns out most environments do this. So if you can, again, through like the takeover one, which Chris just demonstrated, which again, very common, you can use that to compromise the site. And then once you've compromised the site, if the DC is a client, you have codecs on the DC. So again, pretty severe. And we can execute on the client through various different methods. So we can do an application deployment or a script deployment or a package deployment. Script deployment is usually the easiest. So you could just, we just recently just added ourselves to the admin group on the DC just as a proof of concept to show that we could do it. But you can, the possibilities are endless.
Real quick, just want to mention something that I forgot. So the demo that we did of Hierarchy Takeover 1 just now, obviously I was like not trying to hide it or have any type of OPSEC consciousness, but I do want to recommend our colleague Nick Powers' talk. Once the videos come out, it's called Relay Your Heart Away, Unbinding 445. It'll teach you exactly how to do this attack over C2 for the red teamers. Going to kind of cruise through these because I want to make sure we have room for questions, but this was the origin of Takeover 1. It was a problem we were facing. We found a connection string for a database in a network share, and that allowed us to authenticate to just some random database on the network. We crawled SQL links, and one of the links was DBA in the central administration site database. So we had database access, but we didn't really know how to turn that into administrative privileges in SCCM. So we cracked some DBA creds, logged directly into the database, and then figured out a way to get ourselves into that group in a lab, and then executed that in prod, of course. Another kind of funny story, we were on a client engagement and we were observing kind of what the SCCM environment looked like, and we had seen in the logs that the site server, because automatic client push installation was enabled, had been trying to authenticate to the CISO's laptop for 2 years, but the object didn't exist. So we didn't actually execute this attack. It was more of an audit-style assessment, unfortunately, but in theory, we could have created a DNS record for that object, pointed at our machine, and capture a relay that authentication to take over other, take over whatever machines that had administrative privileges on. Which one? This guy?
Yep.
All right, crisis averted.
Okay, so if you're like us, we felt pretty overwhelmed by everything that was happening, everything that was being discovered, and there's so many different attack techniques and so many different ways to defend against this stuff that I couldn't keep up. I don't think any of us could. So we felt it was necessary to kind of document everything in a single place for everyone, and that is what Misconfiguration Manager is. So this was inspired by a couple different people that I'd like to give a shout out to. First of all, our colleagues Will and Lee with the certified pre-owned paper. We knew that we had such a vast body of knowledge that we had to share that we wanted to put it into some kind of format that was digestible and had a taxonomy like they did, with like their ESC 1 and 2, and et cetera. But after talking with them, we learned that maybe a white paper wasn't the right way to do this. Instead, we created a living knowledge base that we're maintaining on GitHub that we hope that will continue to grow over the years. And so Misconfiguration Manager contains like an SCCM primer, basically the stuff that we talked about here. Also contains offensive techniques, defensive write-ups for how to prevent some of this stuff. We have detection, and even we have one canary idea in there, but there's probably more out there. And like I said, it introduces a taxonomy, which we'll talk about on the coming slides. We want to demystify all of this for you because it is vast, it is complex, and there's just so much, and there's a lot more out there. So we know that something like a white paper would have been a snapshot in time, whereas this will let us to continue building. And so we build it kind of in the style of MITRE ATT&CK, also inspired by Push Security's SaaS attacks matrix. So if you're not familiar with that project, I recommend checking it out. Kind of the same idea, but for SaaS stuff. And so this is just an example of what is in there now, broken out into a MITRE ATT&CK style matrix. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but these are some of the attacks that we have documented already. And then I mentioned that there is we created a taxonomy for this because we wanted to organize this stuff, and we know there's more. So first we have the CRED technique. So these are related to credential access, as the name would imply. There is currently 5, but I think we have maybe 1 or 2 other ideas that we have not written about yet. We have Elevate, which is used to do a privilege escalation named Elevate instead of Escalate, just to not confuse people that are familiar with certified pre-owned. Exec is code execution on a client. And then we have Recon as well. So Recon kind of encompasses how to find the SCCM servers, but also how to use SCCM to do Recon. And then maybe the most interesting one is Takeover.
So these are all the takeover methods that rely on NTLM relay. I'm not going to read them all to you, but if you want to check out exactly how to execute each of these, you can check out the repo, as well as if you're a defender, to mitigate and detect some of these. Detection ultimately boils down to if a computer is authenticating from a system that is not that computer, then that's a pretty high fidelity alert. Yeah. For the defensive techniques, we have prevent category, detect, and canary. So each of the offensive techniques correlates to one or more of each of these, except for canary, and vice versa. So both attack techniques and defensive techniques kind of tie into one another in the repo. Going to quickly show you kind of what it looks like, how it's organized on the left. Each of the offensive techniques contains a description, what attack TTPs they tie back to. The requirements, most of these are default in a lot of cases for coercion and relay. Basically, if you don't have NTLM relay protection explicitly enabled, it's probably possible. And then on the defensive, the description of the impact, the defensive IDs that the offensive technique relates to. Sub-techniques, like I mentioned before, there's 8 takeovers there, but there are 23 total sub-techniques depending on what system you coerce from, because the different types of systems have different privileges in the database or on SMS providers in order to add ourselves to that full administrator group. So all of that's detailed there, and then the actual execution instructions, and then some references to additional information or the research where these things originated. On the defensive side, prevention looks like this, a summary of what to do and why, and the offensive IDs that they link to, and other defensive IDs that are additional layers of defense that are related to this prevention measure, as well as the references where these came from. And we wrote an audit script in order to help organizations find these things. We released misconfiguration managers, and admins were like, I don't want to read this whole thing. So we wrote this to kind of try and help identify some of these. It's not going to catch every single thing, but it should help identify the low-hanging fruit, particularly which takeovers are possible and which elevations are possible. It requires read-only analyst privileges in SCCM, but it will be a lot more accurate if you also run it with local administrator privileges on all of the site system roles so that it can connect to them and read the registry to determine if relay to that system is possible. But let me demo this for you very, very quickly. When we run it, it will connect to each system. It will query for whether SMB signing is required or EPA. It will look to see if automatic client push installation is enabled. If we scroll back up, it will tell us takeover 2 and 1 are likely in this environment as we go. And it'll also spit out kind of like a site hierarchy tree at the bottom here. Once it's done running, it will do a final analysis and provide this tree view of the hierarchy, and again, tell you what possible issues you have in the takeover and elevate categories. So we've talked a little bit to the folks at Microsoft, the configuration manager team, a lot of IT admins who are interested in security, and they do seem to be taking this very seriously. They have started work on enabling organizations to fix these things. So for example, we weren't really sure if recommending extended protection for authentication was going to have performance impact on the site database. I think 3 or 4 weeks ago, they just announced that EPA is officially supported to help organizations fix things like hierarchy takeover 1. Definitely want to collaborate with everyone if you're interested in contributing to Misconfiguration Manager or want to just chat with us. We hang out in the SCCM channel on the Bloodhound Gang Slack. And that's it. Thank you guys for joining us.
Any questions?
Hello guys, thank you for your talk. Have you seen different SCCM server dedicated for each tiering part, like SCCM server for T0 servers like domain controllers or ID Connect? Yes. And also SCCM for T1 and T2 machines?
That's a great question. So I have not actually seen anyone doing it, but we have been recommending that that organizations at least treat SCCM as tier 0, or like you said, use a tier 1 SCCM for tier 1 assets, et cetera. I have not actually seen it.
We haven't really seen it be implemented in that way. But yeah, we do recommend that trying not to cross forest boundaries by placing accounts for multiple forests into SCCM, because if you compromise the domain, you can likely become SCCM administrator, and then you have access to the other domain or forest. But we have yet to see that implemented in practice.
Anybody else?
We do have swag, so if you ask a question, we'll give you a t-shirt.
Hey, I was curious, there's obviously a diverse selection of takeover and escalation primitives. What do you see as like the next thing to look into, or interesting items for future research?
I'll defer to Chris for that one.
For me, it's Intune. You know, another ubiquitous Microsoft product used for endpoint management. They're really pushing for organizations to move their workstation workflows into Intune, and I expect there are going to be a lot of similar challenges, hopefully more secure defaults, but also more attack surface. Good question.
How much information from the overall hierarchy can you query from the client?
So like what type of recon can you do if you're just on a client? So you can query LDAP. There's a few different site system roles that have their own attributes when the schema is extended to support SCCM. You can use SMB. A lot of the site system roles will host shares that are named a certain thing that can be used to profile systems like that. Some of them have HTTP services where different endpoints will return different status codes. So all of that, I would recommend looking into SCCM Hunter by our coworker Garrett. He's done a ton of research into that and has done a really good job trying to identify those site systems remotely. The one that has been really evasive for us is identifying the site database, because clients don't have any insight into that directly. Usually we can only see directly like management points, distribution points, roles that clients talk to, or things that are published or directly accessible. But the site database tends to be a tough one, so we usually just look for similarly named systems, or try and identify it in the client's documentation.
Have you had a look at the HTTPS part of SCCM? Because there was a time where you could integrate it with AD certificate services, and the talk from yesterday didn't suggest that it's a good idea or opens a lot of vulnerabilities.
Yes. Yeah, so the network access account, if you're not using that, like the workaround is to use like enhanced HTTP, which is basically a self-signed certificate. Like you can think of it as like poor man's HTTPS. But yes, if you're using PKI, then that would be the ideal situation. Again, I don't think we see it very much, but we do, in the repo, we do recommend that people do that.
Yeah, PKI will prevent like that spoofing attack, so you won't be able to register a fake client because it's expecting that certificate. But the other attacks, it wouldn't really have an effect on like the hierarchy takeovers.
You said that the network accounts or network access accounts are pushed to the clients and used by the clients then. Are there any other circumstances or any other account types which are pushed to the client in clear text and then used by the client?
Yes. So all of those accounts that I talked about are sent to the client. And is this working? Oh, that's really loud. All of those accounts are sent to the client in the same manner, stored in the same way. They're all in the computer policy. So the only exception would be things like the task sequence accounts, which would depend on like the SCCM collection where that task sequence applies. But if you are on a client in a specific collection and there's a task sequence applied to that collection, then those accounts would exist in the same manner.
Have you had a look at the cloud management gateway and if it adds additional attack surface?
That's a great question. It's one of my favorite questions. I started looking at it, and then because I was trying to see if maybe I could actually deploy my own instance in the cloud and use it for C2 on a real engagement, because I thought it'd be funny. And CMG was just incredibly complex, so I just stood up a management point in the cloud, and that seemed to work. I haven't quite finished that research, but haven't dug into Cloud Management Gateway much beyond that. Our coworker Garrett started looking into it, doing profiling for it specifically, and identified some interesting files that exist on that system that can inform other attacks, but beyond that, we haven't dug too much into it yet.
Okay, thanks guys.
Thank you.